Welcome back to the channel, folks. In this entry, we'll be taking a look at Simon Gruber from Die Hard with a Vengeance. As a fellow sibling in the Gruber family, Simon bears some similarities with his brother Hans in the sense of their capabilities as a leader and their proficiency in the art of creating diversions to conceal their true intentions. An exceptional thief himself and a most sly villain, Simon was a master of his craft, an agent of anarchy, one who conducted his criminal operation in broad daylight under the cover of chaos, pulling off the mother of all heists that would set him up financially for life. In terms of their success with their objectives, Simon could be said to be more successful than his brother, but he had one advantage that Hans did not, namely the preconceived notion by the police that he was on a mission avenging his brother. As it turns out, Simon couldn't care less about getting revenge for Hans, and even his attempted execution of John is simply rooted out of an annoyance with him for disrupting his plans. There is a clear sense of animosity amongst the Gruber brothers, and given that Hans originated from a freedom group in West Germany, while Simon was a colonel from the East German army, perhaps it was due to a difference in political opinions that drove the Gruber brothers apart, as East Germany was a communist dictatorship, while West Germany was a democracy. But while Simon may not have gotten along with his brother, it's suggestible that his relationship with his father was more amicable, given that Simon adopted his father's name of Peter for one of his many aliases. With the reunification of Germany and the dissolution of the National People's Army, Simon resorted to the trade of being a mercenary to survive. A choice that may be more out of necessity than desire, as most of the soldiers from the NVA were unable to be absorbed by the unified armed forces, and left with meager pensions and only being able to find work as laborers or security guards. As he puts it to his men, they are an army without a country, a concise statement exemplifying the feelings of abandonment that ran rampant among the ranks of his former comrades. Men who are left on the bottom rung of society to fend for themselves, men who have nothing to lose and hence ripe candidates to be influenced towards criminal exploits. Due to his experience running an infiltration unit in the German army, Simon is the equivalent of a human chameleon, an expert in adopting different personas with accurate accents, the likes of which allow him to weave through the world of commerce for his fraudulent purposes. Of all the tools in his arsenal, deception would rank as the foremost, not just in his dealings with law enforcement, but also with his own allies, as we see in the case of Targo, who was only sold into Simon's plan under the false promise that all the gold would be destroyed instead of stolen. Simon's deception in this case lends support to the fact that he is a man who knows which buttons to push, and one who will say anything to ensure the loyalty of his followers, even if it will come back to bite him later. But of course, the pinnacle of Simon's craftiness comes in his misrepresentation to the police department, using his alleged vendetta against John as a smokescreen to cover his true intentions of the Federal Reserve heist. Demonstrating a keen understanding of human psychology, Simon's ability to misdirect is so successful that he manages to confound even the department's psychologist, causing him to mistakenly believe that his motivation is anything but money, when it actually is. If deception was one of the twin pillars of Simon's success, then fear would certainly be the other, sending the entire NYPD on a wild goose chase under the threat of scattered explosives, giving them enough truth to keep them intrigued while maintaining enough deception to keep them in the dark, missing the forest for the trees. As John is instrumental in his ploy, Simon is forced to keep him alive, but not that John's survival irks him as much as it should for someone who caused the demise of his brother. Perhaps most intriguing of all is Simon's choice to frame his ploy in the form of the children's game of Simon Says, which hints at some megalomania on his end and proves instrumental in duping the NYPD. Unlike his brother Hans, who was expelled from the armed forces we see that Simon still identifies as a military man at heart, as reflected in his choice to ditch the suit and tie for more functional clothing as soon as the need for them was over, combined with his wearing of military dog tags, and by the way he stands like a soldier with his hands behind his back. This identity as a soldier is perhaps what makes Simon's endgame far more dangerous than his brother, who was simply looking to retire on a beach. With the amount of men looking to him for purpose, and with his casual statement of which country they're going to buy, it's likely that Simon might have more nefarious purposes with his newfound wealth of $140 billion, possibly forming another military faction to expand their reach. As you might expect of someone with his military status, Simon has little tolerance for verbal insults and appears to be aggravated over something as slight as being interrupted mid-sentence. But perhaps this short-temperedness also has its root in his medical condition of being prone to migraines, which causes Simon to always be on edge. And while Simon has shown that he is more than capable of using lethal force, we see that it is a usage of force that is still restrained and never in excess, with Simon often choosing to incapacitate instead of kill, such as his choice to tranquilize the security guards, or when he spares Zeus from being killed by his henchmen. Most apparently, he makes mention of this himself, after the facade at the school, when he tells John that he isn't a monster. Midway in his escape attempt, he offers John a bribe, and it's likely that if John had accepted, Simon would have gladly split the gold with him to save himself any trouble with law enforcement. So as heinous as his actions might be, there are some lines that Simon won't cross, but only insofar as they don't conflict with his goals, as we see that he had no qualms about blowing up Bonwit tellers and the subway earlier, two highly destructive acts, the latter of which was pivotal to the success of his heist. Simon's last trick also lends credence to his tactical genius, and his fake plan to blow up the gold under the alleged outcome of destabilizing the Western economy. In a vacuum, this might have been a convincing distraction, save for the fact that it's borrowing a page from his brother, a trick that John easily saw through given his prior experience with a fellow criminal bearing the Gruber name. I suppose at the end, while much of Simon's antics amounted to mere smoke and mirrors, there is still much blood on his hands. The destruction of the subway proves to be his most egregious act, but perhaps on a larger magnitude, even more damage might have been inflicted by a greater offense, the spreading thin of police resources, plunging the city into a state of anarchy and lawlessness. While he may have been more successful than his brother, he meets the same deserved demise, a life cut short prematurely by the folly of a vicious greed and ambition.